Okay, so get ready for a deep dive into, well, free will or maybe the lack of it. You know, that whole debate about whether we actually have a say in our own lives. We've got this blog post here, and it's really digging into this idea, but tying into physics, which makes it extra interesting, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a classic philosophical head scratcher, you know?
Hmm.
But bringing in modern physics, it's like, whoa, it gets real.
Right, like I'm here making choices all day long, or at least I think I am.
Yeah.
But then you read about stuff like Laplace's demon, and suddenly it's like, wait a minute, is any of this even real?
Yeah, Laplace's demon. Always a fun thought experiment. So picture this being, right? And it knows like everything about every single atom in the universe, like where it is, how fast it's going, the whole deal. Laplace was saying this being, it could basically predict the entire future.
Because it's all just cause and effect, right? Like if you hit one billiard ball, you know how the rest are going to move.
Exactly. It's all just a chain reaction going all the way back to the Big Bang, maybe. So that's the deterministic view. Everything's set in motion, including our choices. But then there's this whole other side, this idea of like contemplative free will. That's where the article really got me thinking.
Okay, now you got to explain this contemplative free will thing. Because if everything's just a domino effect from the beginning of time, how do we actually have any freedom?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? This idea is saying, okay, maybe our actions, our external stuff is kind of bound by all those physics laws, but our internal world, what's going on in our minds, that's where the freedom might actually be.
So it's not about controlling what happens to me, but about how I choose to deal with it all internally.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding that freedom in how we think, how we react, what we value, even if it's all part of some grand cosmic plan.
Interesting. So how does this contemplative free will idea challenge the traditional understanding of free will then?
I think it's like, instead of looking at it as like, can I do anything I want? This
Uh-huh.
contemplative free will is more about what's going on inside when we do make those choices. Like it's saying the freedom is in how we interpret things, how we apply our own values, even if those choices were like predetermined somehow.
Okay, I think I see what you mean. So instead of trying to control the whole universe, it's more about realizing we have control over our own inner world.
Yeah. The article, it uses this metaphor of an author writing a book, right?
Yeah.
So the author might have all these constraints like deadlines, genre expectations, whatever, but they still get to decide how the story unfolds, what the characters are like, you know? So contemplative free will is saying maybe it's the same with us. Like we're all living out our own stories, and even if the big plot points are kind of set, we still have a say in how we experience them, how we tell our own version of the story.
I like that. It makes you think about how much power we actually DO have, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. So that's where our freedom lies. Wouldn't that, I don't know, make personal responsibility even more important?
Definitely. Yeah, the article talks about that too. It's not like this idea lets us off the hook for our actions. It's more like it puts the focus on really examining our choices, you know,
Yeah.
checking in with our own moral compass and making sure we're living in a way that feels true to ourselves, even if we didn't necessarily choose the circumstances.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about Laplace's demon and how classical mechanics kind of supports this deterministic view. But what about quantum mechanics? Doesn't that throw a bit of a wrench in things? I mean, the article mentioned it, but didn't really go into detail.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. And it's kind of a whole other layer to this whole thing, because with classical mechanics, it's all about predictability, right? Like, you know how one thing leads to the next. But quantum mechanics, well, it's all about uncertainty and probability. It's like the opposite.
So instead of those perfectly predictable billiard balls, we're dealing with something way more unpredictable at the tiniest levels of reality.
Exactly. It's like, take radioactive decay, right? We know an atom's going to decay, but we can't say exactly when. It's all probabilities. It's like the universe is rolling dice. And that changes things, doesn't it?
Right. Even if we knew where every particle was, there'd still be this element of randomness. So does that mean, like, genuine free will is possible?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Some physicists and philosophers, they say that quantum randomness, maybe that's the key, that maybe it's how free will can actually exist. Because even if the universe has laws, those laws might include an element of chance. Even Laplace's demon couldn't predict that, right?
Wow, it's kind of amazing when you think about it. Like, physics and philosophy, they're both trying to answer the same question about free will, but from completely different angles.
Totally. And it's not about one being right and the other being wrong, you know? It's
Yeah.
like they're both giving us these different pieces of the puzzle.
Right. We need both to even begin to wrap our heads around it all. But I guess the big question for our listeners is, where does all this leave us? Like, what are we supposed to do with this whole idea of contemplative free will? How does it actually apply to our lives?
That's the thing, right? The article doesn't really give us a roadmap or anything. And maybe that's the point,
Yeah.
because contemplative free will, it's all about each of us figuring out what it means for ourselves.
Yeah, I get that. So it's less about proving or disproving free will and more about how we each choose to see it, like in our own lives.
Exactly. It's about realizing, hey, even if the universe is this giant predetermined machine, we still have this inner space where we can decide what things mean to us, what we're going to focus on. Like, that's still up to us.
Right, like just because something happens to us doesn't mean we can't choose how we react to it. But this is even bigger than that, right?
Mhm.
It's about taking that idea and applying it to like our whole outlook on life.
Exactly. And saying we're not just robots reacting to programming. We can actually look inward, figure out our values, and try to live by them. That's where we find our own agency.
It's like we all get dealt a hand of cards, right? We don't get to choose the cards, but we decide how we play them.
Oh, I like that. It's a good way to put it because, yeah, even within the rules of the game, there's still so much room for strategy, for making choices that matter.
So with this contemplative free will thing, it's less about finding the right answer and more about asking ourselves the right questions, like what do I believe? What's important to E? And how do I make those things my focus?
Yes, exactly. It's about recognizing we have this amazing ability to reflect, to make choices, and to find our own meaning in the world. And honestly, that's pretty powerful when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. Well, folks, looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive here. But hey, that doesn't mean the thinking has to stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want to dig deeper into the science of it all or explore the philosophical side, the choice is yours. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.